My name is Ngozi. My name means blessing, but I have seen very few in my marriage. I am a biochemist by training, or at least I was. Now, I am mostly just Chidi's wife. And I must tell you, this has been the most terrible time of my life. I gave up my schooling during our final year at the university because I conceived his child. I truly thought I was in love, believing I was signing a deal for life. But I turned out to be signing a contract with a destroyer. Chidi's name means God is, yet he acts as if he is the Almighty. Handsome, wealthy from his large export business, and cursed with an immovable, suffocating arrogance. My pain, the years of emotional neglect, and the weight of my sacrificed dreams became the foundation of my greatest work. That pain was a silent laboratory, preparing a solution Chidi would never anticipate. My mind is a fortress built with scientific knowledge, studying the formulas that govern life. But Chidi saw none of this. He dismissed my intelligence. He saw only a quiet wife who cooked his afang soup perfectly and managed his large, immaculate compound. I was a fixture to him, like the imported marble floor, necessary, expensive, and utterly beneath his serious attention. This contempt, silent but constant, was the heat that fired my resolve. I knew my worth was not just in the kitchen, but in the complex world of molecular structure, a world Chidi could never comprehend. He assumed my silence was ignorance, but it was the quiet of a brilliant scientist observing a failing experiment. The question was not how to live, but how to ensure his downfall was built entirely by his own hand. For 3 long, agonizing years, I watched. The watching was a slow poison in itself, but it was vital for my diagnosis of his soul. I watched as Chidi's ambition overflowed his heart, leaving no room for me, no space for the wife who sacrificed her future for him. I watched as his eyes, once pools of sincerity during our university days, began to wander, landing finally on a glittering young woman from the city whose laughter was louder than my silence. Chidi was offensively careless in his betrayal. He thought his lies were invisible, tucked safely beneath the cloak of his immense power. He would return at dawn, smelling of strange perfume and cheap smoke, believing I was too broken, too timid to notice the deep cracks in his story. But I did not just see the cracks. I measured them, analyzing the data of his disrespect. One desolate morning, I knelt by our massive, empty marriage bed. I did not weep. The anguish had long since evaporated, leaving behind a chilling residue of cold, precise calculation. I knew the devastating outcome if I confronted him. He would deny everything, accuse me of madness or hysteria, and discard me without a second thought, leaving me with the shame and the complete silence. I refused to be the final, broken variable in his story. I realized the cold, hard truth of the formula. Confrontation plus arrogance equals destruction of the victim. I understood that the true solution required not a clumsy reaction, but a precise, invisible catalysis. I needed a way to dismantle the poison of his arrogance slowly, using his own habits, his immense vanity, and need for control against him. I would be the author of his chemical breakdown. I rose and walked to my small, locked laboratory room, a space Chidi, in his boundless stupidity, mocked as my chemistry kitchen. I did not reach for the fast, loud poisons of old. Such crudeness lacked the elegance and evidence I required. Instead, I reached for something far more insidious, something that mimicked the slow, untraceable weariness of a guilty conscience. I formulated a compound, a synthetic sorrow. It was colorless, odorless, and designed to act agonizingly slow, targeting the very structure of his self-assurance. This compound was my weapon of psychological precision, designed to be indistinguishable from the natural decay of a corrupted soul. The siege on the fortress of Chidi's ego was about to begin, and he would never know the war had started. The synthetic sorrow was designed to cause a gradual, untraceable systemic disorientation. In the old language, they might have called it the herb of the hidden reckoning, the work of a wronged spirit. But I knew it simply as a precise blend of compounds, a formula designed to mimic the stress of a life built on absolute lies. This formula had one terrible, unavoidable side effect. It tasted intensely, powerfully sweet. This overwhelming sweetness was the final brilliant stroke of my plan, the perfect tool of deception. I focused on Chidi's immutable, comforting ritual. Every afternoon at exactly 4 p.m., he drank his special herbal tea, sweetened heavily. This moment of routine satisfaction would become the vector of his slow undoing. That fateful day, I prepared for the first dosing. My hands were steady, guided by scientific discipline, not by emotion. The dosage had to be exact. A large amount would betray me. A microdose would be mistaken for common stress. I added the compound not to the tea itself, but to the large jar of white sugar he kept solely for his personal cup, a dedicated, uncontaminated reservoir for my slow revenge. Chidi rushed home at 3:50 p.m., loud and preoccupied, smelling faintly of the city woman's cheap smoke. He barely grunted at me, but went straight to the kitchen, exactly as the pattern predicted. I listened to the metallic clang of the kettle, the terrible sound of the future collapsing. I stood ready, knowing the point of no return was minutes away. The tension was thick as Chidi prepared his fatal reward. He brewed his tea, the steam rising around his handsome, arrogant face. He reached for his personal sugar jar, dipping the large silver spoon deep into the reservoir I had so carefully prepared. He scooped out a generous spoonful of the crystalline mixture, watching it dissolve quickly into the hot, dark herbal liquid in his cup. I stood by the sink, washing a spoon with slow, deliberate strokes, my back to him, my heart beating a cold, steady rhythm. The most dangerous moment was now, the point of ingestion. If he hesitated, if the flavor was wrong, 3 years of quiet suffering and weeks of intense formulation would be wasted. I listened only for the sound of his satisfied sigh. Chidi lifted the cup to his lips and took a long, satisfied sip. He paused, his eyebrows lifting slightly in genuine surprise at the enhanced flavor. "Ah, Ngozi, what did you do to the sugar? It is so sweet today, the best tea I've ever had. Keep doing whatever you did." He drained the cup quickly, happily mistaking the creeping poison for the simple pleasure of an enhanced dessert, a reward gifted by the wife he had so casually destroyed. I did not turn. My lips curved into a small, cold, purely scientific smile. "I said only the best ingredients, my husband," I replied. I continued washing the spoon, the rhythm cold and steady. The formula was now inside the vessel of his body. The countdown had begun, initiated by his own immense need for sweetness and self-satisfaction.
The change in Chidi was not immediate. I had engineered an erosion, not an explosion. A process visible only to the patient eye. 2 weeks passed, and the first subtle signs of decay appeared. He started to lose his sharp edge. He forgot crucial details of his export schedules, small errors that a man of his former competence would never tolerate. He misplaced signed contracts, documents vital to his overseas dealings. In his business meetings, he would pause mid-sentence, his gaze suddenly blank, desperately searching for the end of his own thought, like a ship lost at sea without a star to guide it. He blamed the unstable market. He blamed his incompetent staff. He blamed the government. His massive ego absorbed the initial shocks, never suspecting the slow-acting truth. I, the unloved woman, listened patiently to his rising anxieties. I listened to him curse his partners and rail against fate, never letting the slightest flicker of triumph cross my face. I poured him his tea every day at precisely 4 p.m., ensuring the synthetic sorrow remained the sweetest part of his life, his daily dose of quiet confusion. "You are working too hard, my love," I would murmur, rubbing his shoulders with my hands. He would nod gratefully, convinced I was supportive, his anchor in the rising storm. He did not know my support was merely the careful, calculated maintenance of the optimal dose, delivered with flawless consistency. The terror was that the symptoms were perfectly disguised as the inevitable stress of a powerful man managing a failing empire. Phase 2 was the terrifying breakdown of his arrogance. The disorientation that I had so carefully induced led to the loss of a major container shipment, a financial blow so catastrophic it sent tremors through his entire business empire. Chidi, the great man, started shouting uncontrollably. He threw expensive objects, shattering crystal and porcelain. He accused his remaining business partners of elaborate sabotage. His paranoia soaring. The arrogance began to consume itself. His mistress, the glittering city woman whose laughter had been Chidi's false comfort, found his constant ranting tiresome. He found his sudden terminal financial troubles unattractive. The external support systems for his ego began to fail one by one. The magnificent edifice of his pride was cracking under the internal pressure. I observed the failure of his external systems with the chilling detachment of a scientist watching an object reach terminal velocity. I knew the cruel equation that was now playing out. Loss of wealth plus loss of external validation equaled exposure of the internal rot. Chidi grew visibly thin. His eyes, once arrogant and certain, now darted with wild paranoia, seeing betrayers in every shadow. He stopped sleeping, tormented by the internal chaos my formula had initiated. He started drinking heavily, desperately seeking to numb the creeping disorientation that was dissolving his reality. He no longer smelt of cheap city perfume. He smelt only of sweat, stale alcohol, and raw fear. The cold air of true humility was beginning to seep in, a feeling Chidi had never known, nor could he tolerate. One humid evening, the great man came home utterly defeated. He didn't slam the door or shout for me. He collapsed, a broken statue, into his imported leather chair, the upholstery absorbing the sound of his misery. "Ngozi," he whispered, his voice small, a sound I hadn't heard in 3 years. I don't know what is happening. I feel like my brain is full of mud." He was begging for diagnosis, never suspecting the physician was the catalyst. I approached him, my steps silent and measured. I held a fresh cup of tea. It was 4 p.m., the final ceremonial dose. "You need strength, my husband," I said. "This will help you think clearly." He drank the tea quickly, sighing at the familiar, powerful sweetness, clinging to the only constant in his dissolving world. Phase 3, the confession of the soul. The inevitable, necessary moment arrived 3 months after the first dose. The formula had reached saturation. Chidi had lost everything material: his business, his mistress, his possessions, and most importantly, his ability to construct a single coherent lie. He was sitting alone in the dark living room, his pride stripped bare and abandoned. I sat opposite him, calm and composed, the judge waiting for the verdict. "Chidi," he said finally, his voice raw and broken, a sound that finally satisfied the scientist. "I have something I must tell you." He began to speak, the poison now forcing the truth from his very soul, molecule by agonizing molecule. The final painful extraction was underway, confirming my hypothesis. He confessed everything: the calculated betrayals, the arrogant lies, the cruel way he had mocked my quiet, brilliant intelligence to his friends, seeing me only as a simple, decorative tool in his house.
He confessed his overwhelming arrogance, the fundamental belief that his own desires superseded my dignity and our vows. He wept, not the manipulative, dramatic tears of an accused man, but the broken, hollow weeping of a man whose internal fortress, built on the fragile foundation of self-deception, had finally crumbled to dust. Ngozi, he choked out, his body trembling, unable to hold the weight of his own truth. I am sorry. I destroyed everything. I destroyed you. The admission was the final, successful output of my brilliant 3-year-long experiment. The problem was solved. He expected me to leave, to shout, to unleash the fury I had held in check for so long. He expected me to call the elders and the police. I did none of these things. I simply looked at him, my dark eyes clear and steady, devoid of either hatred or forgiveness. The time for the formula was over. The physical dose was irrelevant. The work was done. The internal chemical breakdown had been completed. I rose and walked back to my small locked laboratory room. I returned with 2 things, a final cup of tea and a small sealed vial containing a clear, simple liquid. This was the antidote. I set the cup down. This time, the tea was not sweet. It was pure, simple herbal infusion. The ritual was broken, signaling the end. Drink this, Chidi, I said, my voice commanding, but strangely gentle. The other tea you have been drinking, it had a special chemical compound that made it very sweet. It was designed to slowly break down the part of your brain that relies on false narratives and arrogance. Chidi stared at me, terrified, confused. You were using things against me? I paused, letting the fear build. No, I said, my voice sharp with scientific clarity, correcting his poor hypothesis. I gave you the catalyst of truth. I made the inner chaos visible. I made you face the rot you had ignored. The poison was not in the tea. The poison was always in your heart, and I simply forced you to ingest it. The fear in his eyes now was the understanding of true, irreversible consequence. I held up the antidote, the small vial of clear liquid shimmering in the light. This was my final act of clinical mercy, the line drawn between justice and vengeance. This is the antidote to the synthetic sorrow, I said. It will heal your mind and restore your ability to think clearly. It will let your brain function as it did before, but it will not heal your shame. That, Chidi, you must carry yourself forever, the self-inflicted scar of your arrogance. Chidi looked from the vial to my steady eyes. He saw not hatred but a terrifying clinical justice, a justice devoid of the messy emotions he had always relied on to excuse his behavior. He grasped for the last thread of our past. If I drink this, he whispered, his eyes pleading, will you stay? Will you forgive me? Can we start again? I, the biochemist, looked at my husband, the man who was now just a broken, empty vessel. I thought of the 3 years of silence, the strange perfumes, the contempt. I thought of the university life I lost, the future I sacrificed for his transient love. I knew the final, simple formula of life that superseded all chemistry. Love plus betrayal equaled a new compound. I am Ngozi, the blessing, I said. But I am not your blessing anymore. I did not dismantle your arrogance just to rebuild my life inside your ruins. I set the antidote down beside him, placing the responsibility for his future squarely back into his hands. The work is done, Chidi. You are free to heal. I, however, am free to live. I walked out of the house. I did not take any of the material wealth I was entitled to. I took only my mind, my composure, and the small, carefully cleaned beaker I had used in my laboratory. I walked out of the house and out of Obudweze. I left him with the antidote to his physical ailments, the vial of clear liquid, but no cure for the shattered vessel of his ego, and no formula for my return. My departure was clean, surgical, and final, leaving no emotional debris behind, only the chilling clarity of the truth.
My people, I never looked back. I did not seek gossip, nor did I bask in the ruin of my former life. I took my precise, calculated mind and my strong, clear heart to the city. I sought creation, not employment. I started my own powerful company, teaching local farmers how to use organic chemistry to protect their harvest from blight and pests, using science to create life instead of dissolving it. I became a legend, the woman whose quiet brilliance brought unexpected bounty to the fields. My name, Ngozi, finally meant blessing, not just for myself, but for the community. My success was built on truth and exactitude, the exact opposite of the life I left behind. And Chidi? He was left alone with the vial of clear liquid. We do not know the hour he drank the antidote, but we know he recovered his mind and his business competence, though the wealth he lost to his own poor judgment was gone forever. He rebuilt his export company, brick by painful brick, but he never drank sweet tea again. And whenever his arrogance, that old terrible ghost, dared to rise within him, he would stop instantly, his face paling. He would remember my calculated, gentle smile and the fact that the poison he craved was the one that saved his soul by destroying his pride. The sweetness, once his pleasure, became his perpetual warning. The most unsettling fact of my legend is this: Chidi's life was not ruined by malice but by a forced intervention. He was given a second chance, but it was purchased at the cost of his self-regard. He learned that the walls of his arrogance were not strong. They were merely made of unbaked clay, waiting for the precise chemical reaction to dissolve them. He now lives in the cold shadow of the truth, perpetually aware of his own capacity for self-destruction. He learned to trust no one, least of all his own judgment. The village of Obodoeze still speaks of Ngozi, the wife who administered justice, proving that the silent woman's wisdom is always deeper than the loud man's boast. Remember this, my friends. Never mistake a good woman's quiet patience for ignorance. She may be silent, but she is always observing, always taking notes. Her knowledge is not gossip, it is data. And sometimes, when you push her to the absolute breaking point, the sweetest thing she offers you is the very formula that brings your life into perfect, terrible balance. I proved that the greatest power is not found in explosive reactions, but in calculated cold catalysis. Go well, my friends. May your heart be soft enough to receive the truth, and may you never crave the formula of the unloved woman. Like, share, and subscribe to hear the next chapter of wisdom.